All right, welcome everybody and happy Teacher Appreciation Week. Today, what I'm going to be going over is getting started teaching HTML and CSS using coding rooms. I'm Joe Mazzone, and I'm a computer and software engineering teacher at Davies Career and Technical High School in Lincoln, Rhode Island, and I'm also the CSTA Rhode Island president. First, let's just talk about for a minute what HTML and CSS is. Well, it's the basic structure for a web page. So if you go to any web page, the content is structured in a certain way, and all that text and images need to have a structure, and that's what HTML is providing, a markup language to provide all that information on the page with some structure. And then, of course, there's a lot of design elements and colors associated with that particular web page. And that's where our CSS comes in, cascading style sheets that allow us to actually style the web page to look the way we want. So this is a really interesting and cool topic that students enjoy. So let me show you some of the great things that Coding Rooms has to offer when teaching HTML and CSS. Okay, so I am over here on the Coding Rooms website. Of course, you can log in at codingrooms.com. And once you enter in as a teacher, you have your dashboard here. The first thing I'm going to go over is the live classroom feature. So our participants like Elizabeth here, you're going to be able to participate in our live classroom in just a minute. I'll put a link to it in the chat. You don't even need a Coding Rooms account to participate in a live classroom. Live classrooms are one of the really unique features of Coding Rooms. It allows you, the teacher, to create a class environment for every student to have a programming area, and for you to be able to collaborate with them by having a presentation where they see the code that you're demonstrating, and you being able to check in on student code whenever you want. You'll understand it more when we take a look. So I'm going to create a new live classroom for this workshop today. You can always give it a name. So I'm going to call this HTML CSS demo. You have to select the programming language. We're going to select HTML, CSS, and JS, JavaScript. Of course, if you're building web pages, that's going to be what you want to select for a language. If you set up courses on Coding Rooms, you're going to select your course that you have set up, and that adds a layer of security, meaning only the students that you have enrolled in your course will be able to access this live classroom. For today, I'm going to select none because I want anybody that's part of this workshop to be able to join the live classroom. There are some other things that you can go through inside of Coding Rooms. Live classroom. For instance, there is a conferencing feature that, like Zoom, Google Hangouts, or even video calls in Microsoft Teams, you can have video calls with the students to even just share slides or other information right inside of the Coding Rooms environment. I'm going to turn that off for today's demo. We're just going to focus on the code. But you can see over here that there are some options that go along with live classrooms. Check out some of our other webinars specifically on live classrooms if you want to see some of the nuances of that. Once you create the live classroom, you can copy the URL to the live classroom, and you can assign it to your learners on your learning management system or however you'd like. For our participants here today, they can join by clicking that link in the chat. Now, students won't be able to access the live classroom until the teacher clicks start. So I'm going to click start now. If you're just joining us, I'm going to paste in the live classroom URL one more time, just so you'll be able to join. And so here's our live classroom in Coding Rooms. How the live classroom is set up is that there's a presentation area in which everybody that joins the live classroom, all of the students, can actually see what the teacher is demoing. So typically you do this in with some screen sharing and stuff like that. You don't need to do that anymore with Coding Rooms because the students can see it right from this presentation tab. And then the students can work on their own code by clicking on My Workspace. So you'll notice here, I have two different HTML files, two different programming environments open side by side. If I was a student, one would be where I'm watching what the teacher's doing. The other would be where I'm going to actually view my work. I can go over to students and I can see that I have two students right now in my live classroom. So you can check out the students, you can see when they're last active, and lots of other great features. And of course, I can open up their code and check out what's going on. And I can also edit their code. Now, what I always suggest when students first start learning to use the live classroom is I tell them to open up the presentation and My Workspace so that they can see both of them side by side, and they can see what I'm typing and doing, and they can follow along and try it out over on their own workspace. Now, what you'll see is that by default, Coding Rooms, when I created an HTML, CSS, JavaScript project, gave me a boilerplate, very typical HTML file. Set up as index.html, as we'd expect to be our default home file for our web page. And it already has our HTML tag, our opening and our closing tag for that. It has our head, and it has our body set up. So it's already got a little bit something there. You can, as a teacher, edit the template. Maybe let's say you're first teaching them some of these things and you don't want to give them this as a template to start off. You can remove that and you can provide whatever you'd like as a template when you go and create the live classroom. What we can do right now is we can actually view our web page by clicking on this button down in the console area. You can see it says View Web Page. If you have some experience with Coding Rooms and this is your first time looking at web development with Coding Rooms, you may remember that this button actually usually is for viewing the desktop in case your app or your program has a GUI component to it, graphic user interface. For website, you want to view the web page. This little preview will show the web page. So this is our actual web page that we're viewing. What's great about it is it also updates in real time. So I can go and edit this file, and you'll notice that it does refresh this little frame that shows the web page, and you can do that, which is a really nice feature as students are developing their web pages. They can see it change and update in real time. You can also, if you go over and hover over that View Web Page button, you'll notice that it gives you the URL for that web page. And there's a little symbol, a box with an arrow pointing out that if you click that, it will open the web page in a new tab. And so you can actually see the web page in that new tab. This is particularly useful for some web pages because there are some things when you're teaching web development that you will only really see if the web page is opened fully in its own tab and not in that little preview. For example, some of the first things that I like to cover in this kind of web development of just the basics of HTML and CSS is if we go back over to the code, we of course have, as I said, our HTML tag, right? Which surrounds our entire HTML document. All the other tags are going to be inside of that. And there's typically these two sections that we teach about, the head and the body. And so inside of this default template, you'll notice that there is this title tag. And I ask students, I go, what does the title tag do? What is it doing here? As we can see on our web page, it's only saying what we put in the body here. Anything we type will show up on our web page that we type into the body, but what is the title doing? And students start to explore, and that's when I tell them to open it in a new tab, and they'll see that, oh, the browser tab is where our title of our web page displays. And I talked to them about how this additional information like that and the little icon image that shows up for the web page and some other details about the page, we put that type of information in the head. Then, of course, you can start to teach them about some of the different tags, right? And that's really what you end up focusing on when you're first starting to teach these, is you say, okay, there are different tags to do different things or different ways to structure the content on our web page. So for example, right now the body is where it contains all the content that's displayed on our web page. But we need to be able to structure this a little bit more in order to actually display it in ways that we may want to, or customize the way that this content is displayed. If you're just joining us, I'm just putting the link to the live classroom where you can follow along and you can actually put some code and test it out. So I just put that back in the chat for you. So now, of course, you can teach some of your tags. For instance, one of the first tags you probably teach, right, is the paragraph tag, P tag. And you say to students, okay, we can make different individual paragraphs. For instance, I should have done first is students may start to, type some things and they type it on new lines and they go, hey, why I'm putting it on new lines, Mr. Miss, how do I actually structure this so it's on different lines? And now you can start to teach them, you say, well, the content and inside of our body here, it's just gonna be one long string of words unless we tell it how to structure it. And HTML tags help us structure this content. So we can go over and we can surround each of these things with a P tag, and we can create individual paragraphs. And of course, what we emphasize when we first start to cover HTML tags is that every tag, every one for now, when you first start teaching, has an opening tag and a closing tag. And the opening tag and the closing tag surround the content. So we want to create a paragraph that says, hello world, Mr. Mazzone. And so we surround it with a P tag. We want to create another paragraph that says, hello. So we surround it with a P tag. And then we'll do wow also. And of course, a key detail that you point out to students is that there's a slash in the closing tag. So an opening tag, it just says the particular tag's name, so P short for paragraph, but the closing tag has that slash in it to represent that it is actually a closing tag. And of course, you're probably going to go over headings, right? So H1, we can say, all right, there are also headings. And you can teach them about that and so on. Now, again, one of the great things about coding rooms, and I'm not trying to put any of you that are here on our workshop on the spot, but I can go over and I can make sure that my students are following along. And you guys actually may be just kind of watching me and not playing around, and that's okay too. But I can see over here, one person was active 10 minutes ago, another person is following along, and I can check on the code in each person. And we can go in and I can do things on the student's code too. And this is what's really great about coding rooms with the collaboration and the aspect of the teacher being able to watch the student's code. And I can come in here and say, I can write comments. I can highlight this line. I can add a comment. I can say, great job. Or I can add some other comment. And so now this comment's in here. And I can come in and I can fix any small mistakes. And I can also view the student's web page, just like how you can view my web page, by either opening it in a new tab or viewing it in the little preview. Now, of course, there's a number of tags you can go over. Some of the ones I like to go over next after you teach some of these basic structure tags are things like students will start to, try to put white space between. They said, well, I want these things to be separated. Or maybe even in the middle of something, they want, in the middle of a paragraph, they need a line break. So you teach them the BR tag. And then what's unique about the BR tag for them is that it doesn't have an open and a close. It's simply, how I explain it is, it does an action. It just creates a line break there. It doesn't need to surround content, so it doesn't need an opening and a close. And there are some tags that just do that. For instance, the other one that I like to teach is the HR, horizontal rule tag, which draws a line straight across the web page. And so then after students get a hang of just doing some basic content structuring with paragraphs and headings, you can also go over bold, italicize, some things like that. Those tags, B tag and I tag. Again, I like to go into these ones that only require a single tag and not an opening and a closing tag, like break, line break, and horizontal rule. So one of the next things is images. Tend to be sometimes an issue some teachers stumble on when they're trying to set it up in an environment like coding rooms. So I'd like to go over images. And so an image, we use the IMG tag, okay? And this is also one that only has, it doesn't have an opening and a closing tag. It just has its single regular opening tag. And we provide it with some information. Now, in order to actually show an image with this tag, so notice nothing shows up, you actually have to give it a source for that image, SRC attribute. And so this is a great time to actually teach that these tags can also have some additional information that go along with them to make them do unique things. For instance, an image, we need a source for that image of what it's supposed to display. And now there's a couple things you can do. For instance, if you have a direct link to an image somewhere on the internet, of course you can link it there. So I'm just going to do a quick internet search for a cat, because cat pictures are the internet. And this looks like a cute cat. And what I show students at first is that all these images on the internet have a particular URL to them. So when they go and do an image search, either I'm on Bing or you go to Google, you can open the image in a new tab. this happened to go to the website directly, of course. Or you can say copy image link is the other thing I show them. Sometimes when you open in a new tab, it just opens the direct picture. But you can say copy image link and bring that into the website as the source. You'll know that the picture that image link will work because it usually ends in an image extension like .jpg or .png or .gif. And as you can see on my website, there's a giant cat picture right now. And so now that I have this big cat picture, again, just to demo one more time, if you find any picture on the internet, you should be able to right click. If you're I'm in Microsoft Edge Chromium, or if you're in regular Google Chrome, usually it has this option, copy image link or copy image URL, it might say. And it will get you the direct URL for that image. I'm going to show another way in a minute also. So if you can't get this working exactly for a picture you find, I will find one. Or you can actually copy the picture, the URL from my workspace if you'd like. The presentation workspace. And so I have this picture, and it's really large. And this is where, and usually students say that right away, Mister, how do I change the size of this picture? It's really big. And that's where we can introduce that there are other attributes you can add to some different tags. For instance, we can add a width to an image. And we can say how many pixels we want it to be, or how much % of our screen we want it to take up. So I can say, oh, take up 200 pixels. So now it's always 200 pixels in the width. Much more manageable size picture. Or you can say, I always want it to take up 25% of the screen. And this is a cool one to show off because you can change the width and you can watch the image shrink and grow. And students like that. And they start to understand a more responsive web design that changes with viewing it on a smartphone versus viewing it on your laptop, stuff like that. Now, the other thing is, of course, for example, this picture I just got, that's hosted on somebody else's website. We can, of course, host images right inside of our project here and directly relate to those images that we have as part of our project. So let me remove this picture of the cat, okay? It's gone. And I'm gonna go back over to the image search and I'm going to download that picture to my computer so I can upload it into Coding Rooms. Because I don't want to have to rely on that somebody takes this picture down. I really like this picture. I want it to be part of my website. So I'm not going to rely on somebody else's website, somebody else's server to host this picture for me. So I'm going to save the image as, I'm going to actually save it to my computer. I'm going to call it, that's not what I wanted. That either. Save image as. Well, let's go directly to that URL. If it's not saving as an image, I can just go directly to that URL and hopefully it will let me save it as an image. There we go. And I'm going to call this cat and it will be a JPEG. So now I have cat JPG saved on my computer. I actually went right to that URL that I was using before. But again, you may have a picture already on your computer in your downloads folder somewhere that you could use. It could be any picture. And how I'm going to use this in Coding Rooms now is I need to upload it so it's actually part of my project. over on the files, and in your workspace, you may not have this files area open on the left-hand side. Just click the little image of a paper with a fold on the corner. And you can actually see the files area. And you're going to click this little upload file button. And you can actually select the image you want to upload. And so I can click and I can see it's going to show me, oh, this is a cat. So now as part of my project, I have a file called cat.jpg. Once you have an image file uploaded, if you want your website, your HTML file to refer to that image, you simply just say the file's name, cat.jpg. And you'll notice it just showed up. Now I don't have a URL specifically to that image. Instead, I'm directly referring to this relative file path or my project folder where an image may be. I'm going to pause for a minute and just see if there's any questions. Feel free to either unmute or you can put it in the chat.
So I had a weird thing when you had your comment on mine, and then when I tried to edit the lines after, it wouldn't let me like do stuff.
Interesting.
Like when I went to the next line, the comment like continued and it wouldn't let me edit. I don't know what, so I deleted it, the comment. And then
that's fine. Yeah, that's very strange. Let me see if I can replicate that quick.
Yeah, I don't know what it might have been something I did too.
No, it shouldn't behave that way. So yeah, like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess if you don't continue from the end of the comment, but if you do, I'm going to talk to the coding rooms team about that a little bit more because that's kind of a weird behavior.
Yeah.
Thank you for pointing that out.
No worries.
All right. So, of course, the second half of this whole thing is CSS, cascading style sheets. And that's gonna allow us to actually add some color, and that's really what we're gonna look at, but add some design to this, this page a little bit more. So what we can do is create our CSS file. And so you'll notice that there is a plus sign in the files area where you may be uploading an image. And when you click on that, it lets you create a new file. And the standard is to name it style.css, but you could name it whatever you want .css as long as you keep track of that. And many websites have multiple CSS files that they use also, but typically when I'm first starting to teach students, right, you stick with this kind of standard of we have index.html and we have style.css. And there's one thing we have to do. So now we have the CSS file. There's one thing we have to do in order to make this file work with our HTML. And so inside of the head, we do have to provide a tag called link that will link our HTML web page, the actual structured page that has the content, to this particular style sheet so that it knows, hey, when I render this web page, I'm going to render it with this content and I'm going to style it with this style sheet. So we say link, and you're going to say href. It's going to hyperlink reference a particular file that's part of our website, similar to our image, we could technically refer to a file that's part of someone else's website. We can link to anything on the internet if it has access to the internet. But specifically, we want it to link to style.css, our CSS file. It's this HTML file relationship with that file, which is rel attribute, is that it's a style sheet. And the type file it is a text/CSS file. Now, the first time I usually teach students this, when we first use a CSS file, I actually provide this for them and I just kind of talk about it. And then they mess around with CSS. And then maybe like the next lesson, we actually type it in so they kind of refer to it more. And then to be honest with you, moving forward, it's kind of part of the boilerplate template, as many different website builders and in different developing environments will kind of provide this line for you anyway. It's more of something to kind of, that I tell them, you should be able to look up and know what you need to put there to connect them, but it's not something you have to absolutely memorize what you need to put. So now that we have this HTML file linked to that CSS file, we can actually start to stylize our web page. Now, there are many different ways that you can stylize the web page. What we're going to do is we're going to refer to a particular tag that we looked at over in the HTML, and we're going to modify or we're going to style that particular tag that's in our HTML. For instance, one of the first things students tend to ask me, so I like to cover, is they go, or I'll say to them, hey, wouldn't it be nice to have a color background for this website? They go, yeah, how would you set the background to be a certain color? So I say, well, what is our entire web page? And they go, I go, well, go over to the HTML. What represents all the content in the web page? And hopefully they'll say, and they may say some other things, but they hopefully say, well, the body tag, you said we put all the content in there. I say, okay, let's style the body tag. So we type in body, and then I tell them all the different things you want to set for the style, you're going to put inside of curly brackets. And for instance, there's a particular attribute we can change called background color. And Coding Room's ID is pretty good. It does list a number of them, which is great for students starting off because they want to look at some of the possibilities as they're learning. So as soon as I type B, it started to come up some possibilities. I can select from the autocomplete background color. And then they can type in a certain background color, blue. And they go, oh, look, I got a blue background now. That's because, yes, the CSS is in charge of stylizing this web page. It told the body, you're going to have a particular background color. It's going to be blue. If you're not familiar, these do accept certain color values. Coding Rooms, again, has nice autocomplete where students can see a number of the accepted values. You can show them websites where it lists a bunch of the regular values. And then, of course, you can get into like hexadecimal color codes that they can put in for making custom colors. I'm gonna say I like this nice light blue. Oh, good, I think. Yeah, it looks good. So you can select a background color. And of course, we can style any of the tags that we used inside of on our web page. For instance, we had a paragraph tag, right? All of our text over here is in a paragraph tag. So we can say P to stylize the paragraph tag, curly brackets. And in the curly brackets, we can identify some different properties and a value for them to change that style. Now, I didn't talk too much about the syntax here because it kind of auto-completed for me, but you identify the property, colon, the value you want it to be, and a semicolon at the end. So each of the individual properties of the particular style you're setting need to be separated by semicolons. This tends to be, for me, in my experience, a little more syntax heavy once you get into the CSS for students. They have to think about it more. But some aspects of coding rooms and other IDEs with some of the autocomplete make it a little bit easier for them in some of the syntax highlighting and stuff like that. So I say to the students, okay, maybe we want to set the color of the font in here. So we can get the color property. And if I do the autocomplete, it automatically puts the colon and it puts the semicolon at the end there for me. So you can teach students that, hey, quick thing is you can select from this autocomplete by either hitting enter when you're on the certain thing or actually clicking on this, and it will complete some of that information for you. And so let's make the text a certain color. So you can type a color and the text changes. Now with something like this, what I like to tell students too is I say, all right, the text changed. Hey, why did this my web page text not change? And hopefully they start to identify that, oh, that's a different tag. That's the H1 tag. So they can go over, if you want to stylize the H1 tag, you have to provide a style for that particular tag. And so maybe we want to set that color to, what do we got? Let's pick a random letter. Dark blue. And of course, you can go over all kinds of other properties of that we can set for these different styles. So you can go over things like font size. They usually want to know more about. And font family is another popular one. And then also text align is another one they usually like. Let me do that in H1. Text align, and you can say center. So it centers the text on the web page. And of course, there's a bunch of them that once they understand the basics, they can even start to look up some of these and you can give them references. For instance, the one that I like most is W3 Schools for HTML and CSS. I think hands down, they're the best resource for students to kind of learn and have like documentation for this. I'll put that link in the chat. So they have lots of tutorials on this, and you can go over and grab some code for HTML, CSS, and paste it right into coding rooms and check out some of these things. Any questions right now? We got two more things I'm going to actually cover more specifically about coding rooms. But is there any questions for anything that I went over or anything specific about the live classroom that anybody has? Feel free to use the chat or you can unmute. All right, so the feature that I just showed off is the Coding Rooms live classroom. And this is for you're conducting a lesson similar to what I did. Of course, I did a more fast-paced lesson than you do with the students. You probably wouldn't cover as much ground as we just did. But it's for you going over content. They can see your presentation, what you're typing. They have their own workspace, my workspace, and then you also have available their workspaces for you to check on their work, quickly navigate over and help them out with an issue, check out if they're active and they're doing things, all that good stuff. But I want to go back over to coding rooms. I want to mention, and I just clicked leave on the live classroom, so it's still open for you to play around with. That we also have in coding rooms the workspaces where a student can just create their own workspace, HTML, CSS, JavaScript workspace to build their own websites and play around. Or in your course, if you create a course on coding rooms, let's call it Web Dev 101. If you create a course on coding rooms, you can actually assign assignments to students. And so in coding rooms, there is, once you have a course, the assignments area. And in the assignments area, you can create assignments to assign to students where they can submit their work for you to be able to review. What you can do in assignments is you can provide them with a prompt. Let's say it's instructions they need to follow or information about what you want them to complete. So live classroom is meant to be that live time where the class is working together and you're working through presenting information or delivering content, new skills for them. And the assignments area is more for the independent work where you assign them a challenge. Okay, now with your skills, go do X. And you want to you're going to grade it later on. And so you can provide a prompt, do X and whatever it may be. Create a website with the P tag and the H1 tag, something like that, let's say. And let's actually make these little code highlights so they stand out. And then you can set up a template for the student. So if you want to add that CSS file for them, automatically you can. So the assignments have a template. I'm going to go over and I just want it to look like this. And this is a typical template for my students, right? I just give them HTML tag, head tag, body tag, and they're supposed to fill in the rest. So you can do that, save the template. And then when the student actually opens the assignment, you can assign it to a class. So I can go to assign. You can, the date you want it to be released, the due date, publish it to the class, the students enrolled in the class. And I'm going to click on the student preview. And this is what the students will actually see. Create a website with this and this. Open the assignment. And this is what it will look like for the students. Your instructions on the left, their coding area on the right for them to accomplish the assignment. Notice my edited template is also in there. So that you can set up any image files. Some of the assignments, you're going to give them the image files so they don't waste time on it. A little exercise to make sure they know how to use that image tag, something like that. You can pre-upload all those things to the template before you assign the assignment so they can go in and they can accomplish their goal. Any question about assignments before we look at our one last piece? So the one other thing I want to show off is that this is new to coding rooms, newer to coding rooms, is there's the coding rooms developing environments, what we've been looking at, but we also now have a professional IDE, professional developing environment called Visual Studio Code. And Visual Studio Code was actually what I was using in my classroom on my desktop computers before I started using coding rooms. And so I'm really excited that it's inside of coding rooms now. So let me create a new live classroom for us to kind of check this out. And you can go over and you'll notice that you select a language, you select a version if it has different versions. For instance, the Java has different versions. And then this last selection is for developing environment. And right now, Coding Rooms has their IDE that they've built, but they also have Visual Studio Code that you can select. And I'll show you a couple of the cool things that Visual Studio Code has for web development. So you can join this new live classroom. You can leave the old one open in another tab still if you still have it. There's a new live classroom. You can click over on that URL. And when you open up your workspace, you're going to get Visual Studio Code now. The presentation's still going to display, just as the Coding Rooms one, and that is just for ease of efficiency of the live classroom running. It's still going to show it in that, but students would have the ability to switch between Visual Studio Code and the Coding Rooms environment. So there's a button up in the top, CR2, that's Coding Rooms, and then in the Coding Rooms one, there's Visual Studio Code. You can switch back and forth, actually. This seems to be caught up, the provisioning, the developing environment. So I'm going to click this reset instance just to see if it fixes itself. Now it seems to be loading up. And so if you have any experience using Visual Studio Code on a Windows computer, a Mac, even runs on Raspberry Pi, this will look familiar to you. It's a full developing environment that people use, or text editor people use. I can click on, now I got my HTML file there, just like you would with the Coding Rooms environment. It's just a different environment. You still have your web page, your live web page too. You can click View Web Page. I'm actually going to get rid of the presentation just for screen real estate. And you got your live web page here. It live updates. But there are some things that Visual Studio Code has that that people may like. For HTML, CSS, the first thing that comes to mind is the IntelliSense code completion and some of the other niceties of it. So for instance, I had to actually type the start and the closing tag each time, the opening and closing tag each time. Visual Studio Code does a little bit nicer job that if I select the P tag, it should automatically throw in the closing tag for me. So if you like those kind of developing environments for your students, that some of the more full, the ones that professionals use, if you've kind of used that in your classroom before, you may want to check out Visual Studio Code for some of that. It also probably has more code completion, kind of what will show up because it uses Microsoft's IntelliSense software for some of that. For instance, I know in Java and Python, it is a little more extensive than Coding Rooms when it comes to code completion. But so just something I wanted to show off, that this is another option that you can, for assignments or live classroom, you can use Visual Studio Code, or your students can use Visual Studio Code instead of just the normal Coding Rooms IDE. And I believe the Coding Rooms team is looking at some other developing environment options and stuff like that. So they're always innovating. So that's the close of the items on my agenda. Does anyone have any questions, things I can review quickly or briefly?